Thanks so much for tuning in to Reversing Climate Change. I'm the host, Ross Kenyon. We have two sponsors right now, Rainbow and Philip Lee LLP. If you give me a couple minutes, I'll tell you about why they are very relevant to your interests. So listen up. If you follow me on Substack or LinkedIn, you've probably seen me write for Rainbow recently. They have a very idiosyncratic approach to how science is commercialized and how engineering works within carbon removal. And I really like working with them. I've learned a lot from the people there. They're very smart, thoughtful people, and they're aiming to be the most developer-centric registry out there. What's cool about Rainbow is how seriously they take field engineering experience. They aren't there just to write a bunch of detached rules about how things should work in the abstract and then let project developers figure it out. No, they are very serious about field engineering, about how operations actually work in the real world, and they take a rigorous yet philosophical approach. I'll link to those articles in the show notes in the sponsors section. You should check them out because it will give you a very good idea of why I think Rainbow is a very cool company and one that you should consider doing business with. If you are a project developer and you're thinking about which registry to use for your next project, you should absolutely take a meeting with Rainbow and see if there's a fit there. One thing to keep in mind that is often very important to the project developers that I've interviewed as a result of my work with Rainbow, doing customer discovery work, just trying to wrap my head around the opportunities that they're seeing, is how fast their certification process is. They typically quote around 3 months to issue carbon credits, which is very short. It goes by lickety-split for registries. So if you're a project developer, you're looking for a registry to use to certify and issue your carbon credits, take a look at Rainbow. Link is in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening. I'd also love to tell you about Philip Lee LLP. I really like doing shows about the law. I think the law is such a fascinating part of our shared social life. It structures so much of it. It's badly understood by most people. And just structuring deals within carbon removal is hard. I'm talking grown-up deals here. Like when you're trying to put together an enormous package, complicated structuring, a lot of money changing hands, the stakes are high. You really do need a good lawyer. I'm sorry to tell you that if you are a startup out there in carbon removal, you're going to probably pay a fair amount of money to lawyers. There's just no way around it. Your choice is basically, do you get a bad lawyer or a good lawyer? One really cool thing I can say on Philip Lee LLP's behalf, well, one, Ryan Covington and I did a very fun show about how basically no one except for an elite few really know what bankability and project finance even mean. And he lays it out very clearly. If you'd like to go listen to that show, it's awesome and it's linked in the show notes. And also we ended up talking about Ernest Hemingway a fair amount too. So it keeps with the tradition of reversing climate change. One also really cool thing is that they just won Environmental Finance's VCM Law Firm of the Year. They've won it 3 years in a row, 2023, 2024, and 2025. It's the only award for legal teams operating in the VCM, and they have offices in the US, Europe, and the UK. You should check out Philip Lee LLP. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to this. And thank you to our sponsors. You really make this so that it's something that in a busy life with lots of competing priorities, I'm able to keep coming back and making more reversing climate change. Thanks so much for what you do. And now, here is the show. Hey, thank you so much for listening to Reversing Climate Change. This is the host, Ross Kenyon. I'm a carbon removal and climate tech entrepreneur. I'm going to tell you about today's guest, but really quickly, if you could please open up your podcast app while it's still around, give this show 5 stars, write a quick review on Apple Podcasts, say that you really like this show. If you're on Spotify, 5 stars there is great too. Whatever other app you're using, if there's a rating system, please use it. It's very helpful for growing this show, and I would be so appreciative if you could do that for me. For $5 a month, you can become a paid subscriber on Spotify, which is also very helpful. It gets rid of all the ads I don't read myself, and you get some bonus content. In any case, thanks for listening. Today's guest is someone I've known for a very long time, very near to the beginning of my journey in carbon removal. My previous company, Nori, was a carbon removal marketplace and registry that primarily worked with farmers making the switch to regenerative agricultural practices. And we worked with Emma Fuller's company, Granular, once upon a time. That's how we got to know each other. As we joke about in the show, I sort of went deeper into carbon removal. Emma stayed with ag. And we're going to get into what she does about investing in farmland and why it's so interesting. Normally when people say that they're taking something to first principles, they're probably still not. They're probably still taking it to second or third principles. Emma wanted to have an impact on carbon, ecological benefit, and soil health. And rather than trying to find a way to make carbon markets work for soil, Emma zoomed out an even farther layer back and said, what if we intervened on a different financial layer that allowed us to get many of the same results, but required many fewer steps to operationalize, that was much easier for farmers to do, that did not require dealing with a counterparty to buy credits or a registry and MRV platforms to deal with all the complex equations of figuring out how much of a carbon benefit there was on net. And what if we just found other ways of doing this at a different level? And that's what I think is so interesting about this first principles thinking. Emma and her co-founder designed a platform that achieves the result that they want, is easy to onboard partners, and makes this whole process a lot simpler than all of the fancy footwork that people are trying to do with carbon crediting. It's not going to be right for every single application, but I do like how creative it is. Oftentimes when people are banging their heads against the wall, trying to find a way to fit their project into the carbon market paradigm, don't forget, there's very smart, very creative people like Emma out there who have stared into these problems for a long time and said, you know what? There really is a simpler way. We just have to take a different turn farther upstream in the design path. And that's what Fractal Ag, her new company, is. Emma's going to explain a lot more about how they work, what kind of deals are interesting to them, why they're equity investing in farmland, and the ways that they do it that make it very easy, reduces conflict, aligns incentives with farm owners, and doesn't result in a lot of the conflict over the financialization of farmland that's been documented in this show and elsewhere. So thanks so much to Emma for being on the show. I think she's a wonderful example for everyone who listens to the show to look up to and think, how far upstream can we go to get the impact we want to allow us to avoid sort of category error mismatches that happen sometimes between certain types of companies that try to fit into carbon market infrastructure when actually they may not, in fact, need to do so to become commercially and environmentally, atmospherically relevant. Thanks for listening. Here's the show. Emma, thanks for being on.
Happy to be here.
For people who came out of the early days of commercializing soil organic carbon, the second early days, if you don't count the Chicago Climate Exchange, the people who came out of soil organic carbon during those times, I think, could have gone deeper into ag or been so scarred by it that they ran away screaming. And I ran into the arms of carbon removal, and you and my former co-founder and co-host of this show, Christoph Jospe, ran deeper into agriculture. I think those were the two options of coming out of that time. Why? Why did you choose to do this? Why do this to yourself?
This is your fix.
I'm your host, Stassi Schroeder. Welcome to Tell Me Lies, the official podcast. What's the most unhinged thing of season 3?
Steven, because he's so evil.
I do think he is misunderstood.
You see everyone face consequences. It's intoxicating.
The writers just know how to trick you.
There's always a twist in this show.
Tell Me Lies, the official podcast, January 6th, and stream the new season of Tell Me Lies, January 13th on Hulu and Hulu on Disney+.
Well, I think actually in part because I was already in agriculture before I came to carbon.
Oh, okay.
And so that is a big, I think agriculture is so exciting because it still does have carbon potential. And we could talk more about that, but also because it has so many other co-benefits or impacts, right? Like habitat, biodiversity, water quality, so many other things that there's still a lot to be done, even if the voluntary carbon removal pathway for impact got a lot harder to see through.
That being said, it's also had a pretty good rip recently. There's been a lot of soil organic carbon framed in terms of carbon removal that has had commercial success recently. Did something change? Am I missing something? Is it just as hard, but buyer confidence is up for some other reason? What's going on with that?
I would say my guess is that not being as directly related and we're not into it as deeply right now is that these programs, even when we're getting them set up, take time to unfold, right? It takes years to get farmers on board, to do the practices, to see the results, to have the market. And so you're seeing the results that were sort of set up in motion 3 to 5 years ago of getting this enrollment. And so now they're coming online and we're seeing the credits and they're able to be verified in a specific sort of way according to how they were committed to. And so I think that's what we're seeing. The challenge is that the regulatory environment and the demand environment is still pretty low. And so there are still those, there's Microsofts out there still willing to buy and still willing to do that, but we're not seeing the rest of the ecosystem come online. But I think that's how I read those results, which is awesome. Like, we had to do the extra work to get it going, but it takes time.
Do you have any amount of FOMO that if you weren't such a coward and would have stuck inside of the carbon paradigm, you could have been riding high right now?
No, I don't. I wish I had FOMO. I think what's so hard, right, is that a lot of those businesses had to believe something that would change about policy, and policy is so hard to predict and so quickly can turn the other way. And so I shifted to say, okay, how can I build a system that will still drive the same types of impacts, but doesn't require policy change to have to be true in order to make a revenue stream that works. That's a long way of saying that.
I'm going to ask you a question that requires an even longer explanation. So that's okay.
I'm here for it.
One of the tensions that I've been thinking a lot about is the MAGA-MAHA split. And we just saw a major clash between them over Bayer's liability in acquiring Monsanto and with glyphosate and limiting that liability. And there seems to be a tension between Trump, I view as someone who likes capitalist gigantism, likes big institutions, eats Big Macs, is sort of proud of fast food in this kind of way. And then Robert Kennedy Jr. seems, I like that picture of him posing in front of McDonald's. I'm almost not even sure how they were able to get him to agree to do such a thing. And the focus on toxicity would have made it seem like Regen Ag was going to have a really nice moment here. And maybe we're seeing a clash where maybe that silver lining is not coming into play. Do you have any insight on the politics of agriculture and Regen right now?
I have no insight on the politics of anything, let alone Regen. So I'm not going to be useful there. I think, though, what I've always thought is that the way that we all come together across all of the political stripes that we all have is through personal and community health, personal health. I think that is the underlying current. That's what Rachel Carson highlighted so effectively to do clean air and clean water and to have the first Earth Day in the 70s. It was all about poisoning of the environment, poisoning of our kids, poisoning of, right? And that's what really motivated everyone, not these abstract claims about biodiversity or carbon or those sorts of things that a lot of folks focused on. So I think the MAHA movement in general really speaks to that. And that gives me a lot of hope and optimism in a general sense that there is something that we can come together on, and that, no farmer wakes up in the morning and is like, I love glyphosate. I love it. And I'm doing this because I love it, right? They're doing it because it makes sense for their business. And so I think that combined with this broad base of interest of how do we make sure that we keep ourselves and our kids safe, and it's powerful, right? It's really powerful, but yet there's still a long way to go. But no, I don't have any crystal ball about what the politics are that's happening. I think there's some, there's improvements that can happen in all systems, but there's also a lot of stuff that got set back based on where this confluence of different political factors are happening. But yeah, no idea where it's going to go next. Yeah.
Why did I invite you on, Emma?
I've got nothing to say.
Do you ever work with farmers, and we'll get into exactly how your business operates, but do you ever work with farmers who switch to Regen for their own health impacts and wanting to minimize their exposure to toxicity?
I've never had that direct conversation where that was explicitly the only goal. I think the much more common one actually is an economic one, which is pretty cool, right? Because a lot of people sort of are is there an economic, case to be made? And the ones that are really compelling are, I see my margin getting eaten up by inputs and seeds, right? Those are really consolidated industries. Seed prices go up every year. I'm making a tiny margin in between that and what I can sell my grain for. And that's really compressed in this current ag market. If I can rely more on my soil and I don't have to buy the inputs, the synthetic fertilizers, the seed, the expensive seed treatments, the expensive chemistry, basically, now more of that margin is mine and I can control that and protect that margin. And especially on land that I own, as opposed to land that I rent, right? If I own that land and I'm investing in the soil, now that value accrues to me as a farmer. And so that economic that's like what we did in theory. That's sort of the theory behind regenerative ag, is that it delivers carbon and biodiversity and these economic benefits. And we see that in the farms that we work with commonly. So I definitely see it from that perspective, much more than any other, I think, when it's actually a durable change.
That's so fascinating. Investing in farmland has a mixed reputation, but it seems like you've done it in a way to take the best of that curve and use it for yourself. That's a weird way of putting it. It looks like you've done it in a way that is not likely to provoke agitation over, people buy farmland when it's a bad time for farmers, when they're trying to ditch assets that maybe they can part with, and that farmland, they sell it at a loss or at cost, or it doesn't do very well. And you've tried to find a different way of doing things that is not private equity buying up all the farmland and financializing everything, which is something that I'm sure concerns you as well, but you still recognize that there's a need to bring capital into farmland. Is that like halfway accurate to how you think about this?
Yeah, it is. I think one of the things that is really great about, so we take a minority equity position in land. So a farmer can sell a stake, up to say 40% or something of land that we can then provide them capital to invest in their business. And so the result of that is exactly that. It's two things. It's one, we become true partners with the farmer of like, we win when they win, right? We're equity investors. It's not a debt product. So if the land goes up, we both benefit. If it goes down, we share that risk symmetrically with the farmer. And the other thing is that by providing capital for farmers that are well positioned in a downturn, now they can actually act like investors. So typically investors and outside capital can buy when the market's down, right? They have money to be able to put into farmland, and farmers at that moment are really stressed. The reason farmland is going down is because profitability is down. And so they typically don't have the capital to make those investments. When they have it is when the market's up, when profitability is up and land prices are at their highest. And so farmers are just really kind of pushed both ways, that they only can buy the worst times of the market cycle in a very cyclical industry. And so that's been really cool to see the ability of farmers through cycle, where they have these really amazing market opportunities to purchase and pick up land that will probably not transact again for another decade or more, to be able to actually do that. And to have that, say, local operators and be owned. Because that's the other angle of this, right? Is that when you have a farmland investment outside investor, no matter how closely you're partnered with them, you're still typically renting it back from them. And they typically accrue the value, the equity value of that asset appreciating. The farmer does not. So I think that's that's pretty unique in the way that we've been able to do it so far. And then that lets us embed those soil incentives. So that gives us that same financial incentive, similar financial incentive to what carbon payments we're doing for investing in that, because we still see the appreciation improvement in the asset itself. So it's been a nice way to be able to continue doing the carbon work and continue sort of supporting financially the same types of investments, even if it's to a different end goal.
How do you, I was trying to think of a way to say this. It doesn't sound so ominous. I was going to say enforce discipline. Doesn't that sound horrible? But okay, so if you take a minority stake, the risk is that you don't actually have a controlling ability for the farmland. And especially if you're only investing in land, I imagine this is some sort of SPV of some variety, or it's an LLC that is owned partially by you and the farmer, something else. Okay.
No, it's something else. Yeah. So it's we don't invest. We don't have to set up SPVs. We don't have to set up those, because that's a lot of deal cost, right? Mm-hmm. So it's an option. We have basically an option contract, an option on the land that's secured by a mortgage. Is the rough high level. So we have that security in the land value, but we don't take a position in their LLC or set up a separate business, which helps us do small deals. And those small deals are really important, because typically we're investing field by field. We're not doing a chunky $20 million deal. We're doing a $500,000 deal. So you have to keep those deal costs low for our business to be scalable. The enforcing discipline, like how do we make sure that we invest in the right places and with the right partners? We do fairly comprehensive underwriting at multiple scales. Both at the asset itself that we're investing in, but also in the farmer that we're working with and the market that we're investing in overall. But in terms of the practices, right? So the way that there's also an angle to that we want to incentivize investment in soil health. And that can look really different in different places. And so that's the other question that we get a lot is you're a minority, non-controlling interest. How do you might invest in farmers that decide not to invest at all in their soil health. And so how can you say that you're an impact-focused approach? And that was really about, we give farmers the choice. They are the managers. They get to choose what practices. If they do choose to take these practices, we will discount that cost of capital because now we are getting an appreciation gain in the investments that they're making in the soil. So that's one thing I definitely took from carbon and watching other programs. When you ask a farmer to commit to 10 years of practices from year one in an annually managed system that has huge variability year to year in input prices, let alone weather and pests, that really ties their hands behind their back. And very few farmers are willing to take on that risk. And so instead, matching the scale of incentives to the scale of the decision making, I think we'll end up with net more impact than the like very small number of farmers that are willing to sign up for a 10-year commitment to do X practice.
You're speaking in quite sophisticated financial language right now. I imagine people listening probably didn't know exactly what you meant by you have an option that's secured by a mortgage. Does that give you an ability to influence farmer decisions if they decide to do something that is not in line with the investment that you made? How does it work?
Yeah. Broadly, we have criteria, sort of best management practices that need to be enforced. And they're not super different than what you might see for crop insurance, right? So you need to farm a crop, you need to be responsible, those sorts of things. If that's not the case, then we have the ability to say, you need to buy us out, right? We need to exit. This is not working as a partnership. And so that's all very
unilaterally.
It's spelled out in the contract in a really clear way. And so some things like, really egregious, you mine all your topsoil off of the field, like really egregious, right? Like that is cause for us to be like, we're out, right? That's a default criteria, right? But we spell those out very clearly in our contract for farmers so that we're going in eyes wide open. If this puts risk on the farmer unilaterally, this is not a product that actually works. I think one of the key foundational principles of a product like this is that there has to be value for the farmer. We have to be making their lives better, their businesses better. If it does not do that, we have no business. So we take that really seriously and really focused in the way that we write sort of these criteria to say, like, there has to be some protection for us. We can't just say, do whatever, doesn't matter, light it on fire, it's fine, right? We have to have some ability to exit if things go south. But we're very clear about what those are, and those tend to be good cropping decisions, right? You're growing crops, you're harvesting it, you're taking care of the land, consistent, and also it's structurally set up. You're the majority equity owner, so you are not incentivized to mine this because you will lose out more than we will lose out. So we also rely on that structurally, which is why it's so important. We're a minority shareholder, not a majority shareholder, because now we sort of try to set up the relationship so much that the incentives are in the right direction to have us both do the right thing rather than fighting against incentives. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. Have you ever had to exercise any of those contractual provisions?
No, I mean, we're 3 years in. It's a 10-year relation. Like each term of these deals is 10 years. So our oldest deals are 3 years at this point. So we haven't had significant challenges with that. We certainly are working very hard up front to underwrite and diligence folks so that we avoid that way before it starts. But we also have put protections in place that worst case scenario, everything falls apart. We have some ways to exit because that actually puts every other investment we make at risk. We can't exit a problematic one. Every other farm we work with is at risk. The fund is at risk. So it's actually a protection for both us and the rest of the farmers that we invest with to make sure that we can cordon off and say, this is not working.
Within farmland investing or being a farmer generally, is having a minority equity partner at the farmland level ever difficult? Does it ever make it difficult to sell the land or to do something with it later, in the same way that one of the ways that carbon businesses try to get around this was covenanting, which no one ever wants to do because it really harms the property values. Is there anything like that at play for what you're doing? No, not at all. Not at all. We're very clear about when we talk about our impact. It's during the duration of the relationship we have with the farmer, the 10-year term. And if at the end of 10 years, we want to be able to roll that over to a new investor. So it's a long-term partnership, right? Multi-decadal, but we can't promise that at year 3, right? We're 7 years away from being able to even begin to start, talking about that. So that the goal is that. But that said, some people are like, oh, well, you don't have like 100-year permanence. At this point, a 10-year permanence is insane, right? If you look at, there's a recent paper in PNAS, I think it was like last October, that was looking at the permanence or like of practices. And they interviewed a bunch of experts to say, like, what do you think, the permanence is? And most of them were like, oh yeah, after 3 years, like 80% of those practices. It was like 15. Like, I can't remember the exact numbers, but like it was so low in the 1 to 3 years of practice adoption, which I think a lot of us know is that it takes 3 to 5 years for it really to get stable. But there had been very little research done on just the permanence
Everyone was focused on additionality, like new practices, but just even holding the floor together, like holding the course really matters in row crop ag. And so before we get all excited about checking the box on additionality of new acres, we have to actually stop the leak in the bucket. And so for me, that like just doing our fundamentals here is an important first step. And to be honest about that like even 10 years is pretty material in the system that we have today. And then, yes, I believe that after 10 years of consistent practices, absolutely. But again, there's very little research that shows that to date because no one's looked at it to measure that, which is crazy to me.
Tell me about the ticket size dynamics. I think it's fascinating that you've chosen a lightweight legal approach that lets you take smaller deals, assuming I'm understanding you correctly. Yeah. Tell me about
Yeah. Well, that, I mean, it's matching, again, the farmer need, right? So a lot of investors come in because they have fixed diligence costs that they need to do a $10 million or $20 million deal to be able to cover that. And that leaves a ton of tail in the market that just is not addressed. Let alone this minority equity product doesn't exist. We're sort of a first of a kind product.
So you just
provide
this diligencing is what you're saying.
I know.
Up,
We just say, yeah, it's fine. It's no problem.
Okay.
Let's do it. I think the two things that we can do is one, because we are partnering so closely with the farmer, we actually get a lot more data from the farmer than what you do in a traditional investment scenario. So traditional investment scenario, you're a counterparty, right, with whoever's selling it to you. And so they have all the incentive in the world to say, this is a beautiful thing and to hide all the lemon-like characteristics. For us, because we actually go in alongside them, we request all the data of how they operate on that land, right? So we get to actually see the asset performance for that land that we're going to invest in, as opposed to like sort of going in blind, basically, to farmland, which is typically how you would invest. And the way that we do that is we say, look, like we can get more aggressive with our valuation. We can give you a higher valuation the more confident we are. And so it's more beneficial to you the more data that we can see together. And then we present that valuation back to the farmer. The farmer doesn't have to accept it, right? There's no requirement that where we come to the valuation here makes sense to them. I mean, no requirement that they have to like agree with it. And if they don't agree with it, that's fine. That's totally fine. There's no obligation here. A lot of times in those offer presentations, farmers will point out to us, hey, you missed this. Did you think about that? Actually soils here are really rocky. And so comparable sales tend to go, for 10% less. That is amazing because that's local market insight that we, at a broad level, we're investing from North Dakota to Missouri to Ohio. Like we are very broadly spread, don't necessarily have that very hyper local stuff. But when they give us those pointers, we can go to other third-party data sets and verify, do we actually see those signals showing up? And so that signal might show up just in that county, in that river bottom that they queued aside to. And so if we can verify that, we can often come back and say, you were totally right. Comparable sales, when we looked at it from that angle, have those dynamics. We missed it at our broad brush first pass. Let's update that, and we can update the valuation, come back to you. That then is a flywheel, right, of local information that when we do a deal again with that farmer or in the area, we already have that updated information. And so it builds our underwriting diligence to give us really proprietary advantage basically information that you can see how it reduces diligence and improves the quality just by virtue of doing deals. So it's pretty cool.
It's very cool.
And that's already playing out in real, like we're already seeing that happen. Yeah.
Do you work on a general partner, limited partner basis? Is that how you do it?
Yeah. So Fractal, we don't invest off the balance sheet. Fractal is the sort of operating company. We're a GP of a fund that we're raising. So we go out and raise from investors, family offices, high net worth individuals, institutions that want to invest in farmland. And then we invest through that fund into farmland.
Does the fund justify itself by payments from the farmer, or are you hoping for exits in the future where maybe the farmland becomes more valuable and it's sold in the future? How does it work on that?
Yeah. So from the investor, from the fund, from the LP perspective, they're getting a sort of a return that's based on both appreciation and income payments. So it's not just one or the other. And then
on appreciation while you just hold the asset.
Because it's a 10-year term. So at the end of 10 years, when we exit, the appreciation is shared pro rata. So the investor gets that share of appreciation from what we entered in and then what we exited at.
Oh, so you'll buy 45%, up to 45%, and then they will be buying it off of you over 10 years.
Not quite. Yeah. So not quite. So what ends up happening is we will go in at, say, a 40% stake. We'll have a 40% equity share in that land. At the end of 10 years, the farmer will buy us out. And at that end of the 10 years, we'll see that appreciation in that 40% stake. And then in the duration, they're also paying like an income payment, basically, which functions a little bit like a rent on that 40% stake that we have. And so that annual payment is what's discounted based on the number of practices that they adopt in that year, the amount of investment they make in soil health. And so the investors get both that income rate, that income payment, and the appreciation. Fractal makes its money through management fees, basically, as the manager, doing the portfolio monitoring and some of the origination costs for doing the deals.
Does having a term limit to the partnership between Fractal and the farmer make them more comfortable that you're not going to be like permanently engaged in their affairs?
We found that it was really important to have that for dependability and ability to plan for the farmer. Because one of the things that you often find is farmers may have individual relationships with high net worth individuals that sort of function somewhat like this, perhaps, where they partner with the local dentist or something who goes in and buys the land and then they farm it. The challenge is that typically they do not have liquidity control. They don't control when the investor exits. And so a lot of times investors will be like, oh, I have liquidity control and I actually want to sell right now because the other things are going on in my life and I need to do that. That can leave the farmer extremely high and dry because they have a set number of fixed costs that they're spreading across all their acres. They lose a big chunk all of a sudden. They have to scramble. So having a fixed 10-year term was really important to say, you can plan against this. We're not going anywhere. We're committing to you that we're going to be there for 10 years. The other thing we did, again, because we're trying to balance investor and farmer value, right? Both, this has to be a good deal for investors. Otherwise, they don't invest their money. It has to be a good deal for farmers. Otherwise, farmers don't want to take this capital. It's not useful to them for their business. So we're balancing both on that. So the way that we also balance it in the farmer's favor is we give them liquidity control in that 10 years. So a farmer can buy us out anytime after year 2. So they have control to say, things have changed in my operation. I couldn't foresee this 4 years ago. I need to buy you out. And so we have terms for that, and that's completely allowed. So that gives them that liquidity control, again, for planning, coordination. They need to actually sell the field that we invested in. They need to buy it back out. They need to do a partial buyback. All of that is possible based on the way that we set up the contract and the agreement. And that's standard.
Okay, what I'm about to say is a little bit flattering, so you can blush a little bit. But I've respected you for a very long time, and like we've worked together from Nori and Granular as far back as that, right? That's nearly a decade at this point. You clearly have a lot of experience and know this space very, very well, and I'm sure you could have done so many different things related to agriculture. And what I love about the way that you're describing all of this is that it seems very customer discovery driven. It's very empirical. You design with your customer in mind. You didn't just come up with something in the abstract and try to shove it down their throats, but we're just like, how do you make it as easy as possible to say yes, and leaning on your experience. And I imagine you did lots of work with farmers for how do we close these deals at small enough ticket sizes to do something that is not currently being done. What advice might you give to people who are trying to found similar enterprises, or even just trying to figure out how to add value to the world? Because I think you probably had your pick of the litter for the different directions to go. I imagine you had several different ideas. How did you decide that this is the way to go, and how did you do it?
Gosh.
Sorry to make you blush so much, but it's really cool hearing you talk about it.
Those are very kind words. And I think in retrospect, everything looks a lot more coherent than it does right in the moment, as we're like grasping blindly for like, what's the next thing and how do we put it together? I think one of the lessons I took really early on from one, I think, as someone who cares a lot about natural resources, how do we manage it? How do we balance people's lives and what we want to see, in terms of habitat or other outcomes? Working in agriculture continues to be like an incredible privilege and an incredibly like fascinating place, because it is like right where the rubber meets the road of like, people need to build their businesses and be sustainable economically. And there are huge footprints and huge implications from public health, society, et cetera. Like, so it's just like incredibly compelling. And I think one of the things I took from that is that, I started my career as an academic, right? I had a PhD and I thought I was going to be a researcher. But when we talk about a lot of these private sector solutions, if you're not starting with value, right? If you're not making anything better, you're just actually holding the status quo and making things slightly more complicated. Right. You know this, right? Like it won't go anywhere, right? There's like, you have to provide value. Otherwise, the switching costs, like the learning costs, like none of that matters. And so I think with carbon, we started working with you all at Nori and then continued and did another iteration at Corteva, launching their very large carbon program. And that was true at every level. One, there had to be value for the farmer. There had to be a reason for a farmer to do this outside of anything else that anyone wanted to say about society. It had to make sense for them. And then it had to make sense to the larger organization that we were embedded in, because the organization was taking on a lot of switching costs. And so at every level, it's like, where's the value? Like if I can't make the economic business case that this is good for the business that I'm in, that actually tells me a lot about the sustainability and impact issues. And so I think that's when I give so much credit to Ben, my co-founder and CEO of Fractal, who we've been working together for 7 or 8 years at this point, for really thinking deeply about farmers lack this financing option. So here was like a source of value, right? So 90% of this current iteration of work is around the financing that they miss. It just happens that because of the characteristics of regenerative agriculture, you can actually align incentives to drive impact at the same time that you're solving a need. And that's like the magic combination of like value and incentive alignment to do the right thing, or, you know, the right thing in quotes, like to invest in soil health to get these improved outcomes. And I think it's just a lot of listening to the farmers, right? To like, how do you run your business, and being really curious about that. But those are all like platitudes that I feel like, you know, anyone says that, customer centric and, you know, be curious. And, but I think it's a value part. And I think that's missing a lot of times when people come with sustainability issues of like, why don't they just do this? And you're like, well, there's a reason they don't do that. And what is that reason? What are the costs of doing that? That you have to think about first.
Well, everyone says that, but I think it's obvious from the way that you talk about it that you've thought very carefully about like how much of an equity stake is appropriate to take and what actually de-risks this for them and gives them comfort enough to sign this, that they're not going to actually lose this land somehow. And like, how do you make sure these conversations go quickly and they don't have to be enormous ticket sizes or it's not worth doing at all? And one other thing I noticed too on your website, I don't know if this is true or not, but the way that you have checkboxes make me think that you probably are focused on practices rather than outcomes, and you've probably been scarred by that one too. Is that correct?
Yeah, you read the tea leaves correctly. I mean, I love outcomes, right? I'm an ecologist by training, and so I really from like a pure perspective would really love to see payments based on outcomes, right? Because how, you know, to get super nerdy, right? How long you leave your cover crops in the ground matters. So if you terminate, you know, in February versus in May, you're putting a lot more carbon in the ground in those 3 months between February and May, but it also adds a lot more operational complexity and cost, but like that is better. And so you're just saying like cover crops, check, sort of loses that. So that's just like a long way of saying like, I love outcomes, but you're right. We do practices, and we do practices for 2 reasons, exactly as you were implying. One, the complexity of explaining and forecasting, rightly so, to a farmer. When a farmer's like, great, so what am I going to get paid? Like, I'm going to take on these costs. What's the benefit? And I'm like, well, it depends on the weather, and it depends on like, did you terminate in February? You terminate, and they're just like, you lost me. I'm out. I can't. I'm not even. Like, I've got other things to do. And so it was that. It was like, okay, what is the actual benefit we get above and beyond just hitting practices, so that we have a simple, clean explanation that is easy to monitor, low cost to monitor, and gives us the majority of the benefits. And I think what I see from also the scientific literature, right, is that these are well-supported practices, right? When you do cover crops, when you do no-till, when you do diverse rotations, like these things move the needle in the right direction. And that said, I am also looking really closely at, as we see MRV, you know, can we bring costs down? And we absolutely would want to shift there if we could find a way to do that cost effectively. But right now, I just don't see it penciling. It's just, you know, it's thousands of dollars of extra cost per field to sample, and it just blows up the deal costs basically on the basis of like maybe some like warm fuzzy feelings that we're measuring outcomes like concretely in this exact asset, as opposed to just inferring them statistically. So it's hard to pencil right now.
Very practical decision. Carbon removal has gone the opposite direction generally, where it's definitely interested in more precision, more complexity, making sure everything is accounted for. And there's something that's very noble about that, but it can also be quite harmful to scale and raises all of the deal costs. And like we're so deep into overshoot, and we're basically looking at how to adapt to climate change probably more than how to actually reverse it at this point, or at least that's a lot of what I'm hearing and feeling and seeing. It almost feels like that way of thinking has been leapfrogged by the passage of history. You're like, do we still need as much precision, because we basically are not going to have an impact on the climate at the current rate, especially if the world has changed around us?
This is a hot take, and this is a hot take from someone not currently doing a carbon program. I never liked. I love, Ben will tell you, and probably almost anyone who's worked with me, I love precision and I love rigor, like deeply. And I love, right? Like I love it. And I think the focus on on really nailing with precision the impacts of a subscale nature-based solution is stupid.
Wow.
Because like soil carbon as a pathway for meaningful climate impact only matters if we're at like 20 million acres or more, or 50 million acres. So if you know with precision 100,000 acres, which sounds like a lot of acres, 100,000 is like kind of a lot when you're like a person standing in it and looking around, it matters not at all for the climate. Not at all. It is like such a rounding error. And so building programs that demanded precision at 100,000 acre scale it was so frustrating to me, because it doesn't matter. Like it just doesn't matter. And what you do basically is you hamstring these businesses with all the things that you know, right? The high costs, the inability to like get anything done. And so what I wanted to see and what I liked was like, okay, let's think about the order of magnitude when this becomes material, 20 million, 50 million. One of the nice things about soil carbon and like variability is that, let's see, how not to get too wonky. Basically, the variability is fixed. So as you scale in size, you basically get the law of large numbers, which reduces the variability overall. So the cost per acre of sampling a 10 million acre project versus the cost per acre of sampling a 10,000 acre project is vastly different. And so it's actually scalable with good precision at a 10 million acre, and it's not at a 10,000. And so my point was like, I just don't care about the 10,000. Like I want things to be as rigorous as they can. And that's certainly a balance. But I think everyone just piled on to like, oh, but the error bars are super wide. Like what I would much rather see, and what I liked, was like CAR's registry, in which they gave an uncertainty discount. So there's now I love incentives. There's an economic incentive now for those MRVs to reduce uncertainty. There's money in the game for them to do it. That was one piece. And then the other thing that I think Microsoft did with Indigo is to incentivize data collection so that we can improve modeling and sort of invest in the shared ability and the shared data, which was the absolute limiting resource to this precision, to this modeling. So if you're investing in the foundational data that allows you to improve the models, improve precision overall, like that was the model that I would want to see, rather than requiring perfection at a scale that didn't matter. And so I think everyone who was involved in commentary about, and that's not to say that there weren't like systematic flaws, right? Like the IFM, improved forestry management stuff, and the baselining stuff led to very large scale bias in the way that those carbon credits were counted. And there were some real problems with registries. And so I think that also just tangled what I just said is like a really nuanced, wonky sort of like order of magnitude error. And I just think it got totally lost and totally missed by some of the more sophisticated science-based organizations that could have come out and said, okay, how do we actually think about this really being a solution at the scale that we need to see, as opposed to just getting, I don't know, I'm repeating myself, but that just made me really mad. I'm really frustrated. It's like a really big missed opportunity, I think, in that space.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
LifeLock, how can I help?
The IRS said I filed my return,
but I haven't.
1 in 4 tax-paying Americans has paid the price of identity fraud.
What do I do?
My refund, though.
I'm freaking out.
Don't worry, I can fix this.
LifeLock fixes identity theft guaranteed and gets your money back with up to $3 million in coverage.
I'm so relieved.
No problem. I'll be with you every step of the way.
1 in 4 was a fraud-paying American. Not anymore. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
I think so much of our work is built around not letting companies buy cheap credits and negate fossil emissions or claim to do so. And basically the entire VCM is oriented around that, or tries to be.
Yeah.
And that leads to us going deeper and deeper into the carbon paradigm, which, as you all show, like, is this even the right layer to be intervening to get a similar result? Like, we could also be doing something quite different. And I'm sure you see your work in terms of carbon benefit as well. It's maybe not the primary lens, but I'm sure it influences your work. And you're also probably able to have a much more direct relationship with those outputs because of the layer that you're involved with.
Absolutely. I think the fact that one of the things that I realized working at Corteva which is for those that are not deep in ag, right, is a ag input supplier. So sells seeds, pesticides, herbicides, and also some software, which is how I entered into Corteva through an acquisition of Granular. Those are year-over-year relationships with farmers, right? So every year you make a new sale, and that's how you maintain. And they're multi-decadal, long relationships that those sellers typically have, but fundamentally they're year-over-year. Being a financial product, kind of like a carbon product, but is a 10-year relationship. And now all of a sudden the timescale of our relationship matches the timescale of the biology, and so we can invest in the biology. And that was like a total unlock. I don't think I quite thought about it until we were actually in it, but now that we have a 10-year time frame to, yes, technically they can buy us out at any time, but it's designed to be a 10-year relationship. That now gives us a lot of time to work with and align those incentives and align those investment criteria. I forgot what your question was, but now I'm talking to you about alignment of timescales, and this is where we are on Thursday.
Do you consider what you're doing to be biomimicry in nature or regenerative economics in nature? What you just said, like, you could definitely write a pitch deck around that and appeal to a totally different type of LP, I think.
Possibly. I mean, many of our LPs are impact focused. I think the impact lens that we typically talk about, because we really focus also on this being truly a market rate investment vehicle for investors, as opposed to a concessionary or a lot of impact focused finance or conservation is like sub market. So you have to care about the value you're getting from a conservation perspective in order to want to put your money into it. And for us, it was like, well, again, to the scale point, like, we're not going to hit the scale we need to be at if this is concessionary, because it's just not enough of that money. There's not enough of those people, it's not enough of that money around to actually be able to fund programs like that. Those are important for de-risking and doing some really cool, innovative stuff. But if we're really trying to improve the system as a whole and like operate on a 100 million acre scale, it's the scale of capital is just not there. But yeah, I don't think we talk about regenerative economics too much, because we want to make the point that, like, actually this is the right asset to be in. Like, if you're thinking about it like a portfolio construction, you're thinking about climate resilience, like, actually there's a really good case beyond getting cute and special with regen ag, that actually like the hardcore, like, you don't have to care about impact, and this is actually a good place to put your money. Like, that's the point that I think we're making with the work that we're doing now. It's like, this is really good business, especially as we expect to see more adaptation, more extreme weather. This is where you want to be, not because it just feels good. Ross, how do you feel about carbon?
Traumatized, basically.
Yeah.
No, it's like the work needs to be done, but the packaging for this is so difficult, and I wish we had better ways to communicate it. One of the things that we worked on, a colleague of mine and myself at Nori, was trying to find a new North Star metric, and we're so obsessed with tons, and everything is denominated in terms of tonnage. And can we just talk about acres switch to regen or regen light, or like just like transitional acreage? And like, I feel like that's a great metric too. And also, let's corporations or your customers talk about their impact without it being tied to something as discrete as, and this is going to negate our carbon budget for the year, which I don't really think is appropriate for soil. But still, that work needs to happen. We all agree that we can't just abandon the biosphere, whether it's forestry or soil. Like, we need this work or we're in deep trouble. But the way that we communicate about it and wrap it is so hard. But communicating with customers is very difficult. And they don't necessarily want to be taught in the same way. Like, have you ever been at a party and someone brings out a board game and you're like, oh God, all right,
here we go.
All right, this will be like 45 minutes of learning some rules. And, you can just like see that sometimes, like, okay, we're switching metrics now, and they're like, cool, well, how we have all of our ESG work denominated in terms of a different unit, and these are not convertible units, and so you don't make sense to us. And then it goes into the Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, too hard pile. It's like, it sounds cool, but like, we don't have time to figure this out.
Right.
But even still, you're like, is it worth retooling to a new paradigm? Do we have time to be doing that? Should we just keep going on this carbon thing, even though it really isn't that great and confuses lots of people? And regen is a wonky fit for it. I don't know that it is actually the right, like, I think what you're doing is so cool because it's highly targeted interventions that skip over a lot of the things that probably were very frustrating for you with Corteva and with Granular and Nori. And you're just like, cool, we found a way to make a similar intervention that as I mentioned, the direct relationship is very obvious, and we can measure our impact and the scales, and we're doing something that no one else really does. I could probably go on much, much longer, but please react to what I just said.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I agree. I think when I thought about to your earlier question of like, okay, the writing's on the wall a little bit for carbon. Like I can see ways in which this can scale. And what really requires is honestly a much stronger demand pool for this, because I think the science is there. We'll get there. Farmers need to be paid more than $10 a ton in order to actually take on this risk. Cause it's like, $50 a ton worth of risk. And you're asking them with a $10 a ton, like the math doesn't math there in terms of the risk reward for farmers. The place that I was tempted to spend time in was much more actually at the market building, market maturity level for how do you think about nature-based solutions? Because all we had was this thinking about, like permanent storage, right? Like the formulations for tons of carbon locked up for X, thousands of years make sense when that can be true. But in a nature-based solution, it requires active management. And so it requires work every year to manage the system actively to do that. And so this was like that incentive alignment, right? The value, like the payment structure didn't work for the kinds of costs that those projects would accrue, right? Because you need to pay continually to maintain and deepen the management of those systems. And like one-time payment for carbon just doesn't, you have to do a lot of backbending to like figure out how that can stretch into infinity for an actively managed system. And so and then to your point, like every single carbon program or business was forced to have those negotiations with customers who don't have time to like go super deep. And then every business was paying the cost individually for that. I'm telling you things that So rather like, where are the market maturity mechanisms that can help support the growth of that, to sort of do this once and say, think strategically about what the unit should be. How do you think about uncertainty? How do you think about active management, durability rather than permanence? Additionality is a probabilistic function rather than a binary, right? Like all of those things where you could then actually have a price that reflects that uncertainty, durability mix. That was where I was tempted to spend time, because I think that work needed to be done alongside demand to have it. And that would be the play, rather than trying to spin up another business that had to fight and throw themselves against the wall to try to solve all those problems and build a business at the same time. Yeah, that's my reaction.
Thanks so much for being on, Emma. I'm really happy we had a chance to talk about Fractal and all of your thinking around ag and how to encourage the right kinds of practices, not outcomes, but maybe in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Always a good time.